If you think you already know how the story of ice and fire ends, guess again, because the winds of winter are blowing. Oh, my sweet summer child, old Nan said quietly. What do you know of fear? Fear is for the winter, my little lord, when the snows fall 100 feet deep and the ice wind comes howling out of the north. Fear is for the long night, when the sun hides its face for years at a time, and little children are born and live and die all in darkness, while the dire wolves grow gaunt and hungry, and the white walkers move through the woods. You mean the others? Bran said querulously. The others, old Nan agreed. Thousands and thousands of years ago, a Winterfell that was cold and hard and endless beyond all memory of man. There came a night that lasted a generation, and kings shivered and died in their castles even as the swineherds in their hovels. Women smothered their children rather than see them starve, and cried and felt their tears freeze on their cheeks. Her voice and her needles fell silent, and she glanced up at Bran with pale, filmy eyes and asked, So, child, this is the sort of story you like?
Yes, old Nan, this is exactly the story that we like. Give us the winds of winter right now. I'm just kidding. We're willing to wait. Whenever you're ready, George.
But we are prepared with our winter gear.
Exactly. It's quite cold up in the north, as you can see here.
Yes, out here amongst the trees, and we'll try to keep the wind sound effects to a minimum. But let's have some fun and round out the series and talk about the biggest Chekhov's gun in the entire series, which is, of course,
The Long Night.
the new long night.
The new long night.
Right, exactly. The coming of a new long night.
So we know it's going to happen. It's been foreshadowed heavily. And Westeros is currently very ill-prepared to handle the Long Night. They've been fighting each other, burning villages. They don't have a lot of resources. Things are not looking good for the team living.
That's right. Most of all the kings and lords in Westeros have been doing everything for the throne, if you will, following the false prize. And thus they haven't been looking to the north, as Osha the Wildling was telling us all way back in book 1, Robb should be marching north. That's where the true threat is.
North, yeah.
And now that is finally, 5 books and 20 years later, it seems, or 6 books, I guess it'll be, the others are finally getting ready to invade.
Crap is finally hitting the fan.
So we do expect this new long night to probably be shorter than the first one. The first one was said to go on for years, maybe even a generation. George likes to stretch the tail out, but it's not going to go that far. But it should be longer than the 6 hours or so that we got on the TV show Long Night.
The short night. The regular length night.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then shorter than the original one, obviously, because we don't have time to wait an entire generation to wrap this series up.
Yeah, the whole point is, for the sun not to come up for a couple days. People will start panicking when that happens, I think. So
maybe it'll never come up again.
Yeah, and so the question that we're here to talk about is, how bad will it be? How far will the others go? What are the others trying to do? All that kind of stuff.
How much damage to Team Living is going to be done?
Right, we know the Long Night is going to be bad, but just how bad?
Exactly.
And one of the things I like to talk about with a Long Night is the mechanics of it. In the show, this was very simplified and glossed over, which is kind of what they did with the magical plot lines, and that's fine. We're moving on. But the point is, the Long Night is the hiding of the sun. It's not just the clouds following the others around and kind of making it dim wherever they are. In the world of Ice and Fire, the Long Night was a global event, wasn't it?
Yes, definitely a global event. There's stories about it all over the world. Ashai, the Roin, literally everywhere there's stories about what happened during the Long Night. Now, not necessarily stories about the White Walkers, but stories about the darkness.
The sun being hidden, right. That's the defining element. And if you're going to hide the sun over, half the globe that we see on the map, then we need a mechanism for that, not just clouds. Clouds following the others around would not create a Long Night explanation. Now, if they can wrap the entire northern hemisphere in clouds, maybe. But
cloud seems like the least interesting way that it could happen.
Clouds are not as interesting as moon meteors.
No.
That is definitely my opinion. And of course, I've got a whole theory about moon meteors causing the Long Night. But whatever it is, it's going to be some sort of big mechanism, something that hides the sun, again, for days and weeks at a time. So we should expect a big bang, a lot of magic.
Something that affects the entire world.
Yeah.
So there's also a lot of foreshadowing that when the wall falls, the long night will start.
Yeah, it does sort of seem that way. On the show, those two events were tied together. The others being able to knock over the wall with the ice dragon was the thing that cued their invasion. So I do think that makes a lot of sense. There is, of course, a ton of foreshadowing about the wall falling, and a lot of it does seem to be tied to the long night falling, the end of the world, and actually Jon Snow in particular. And here's the first of many quotes.
As he stood outside the armory looking up, Jon felt almost as overwhelmed as he had that day on the King's Road when he had seen it for the first time. The wall was like that. Sometimes he could almost forget that it was there, the way you forgot about the sky or the earth underfoot. But there were other times when it seemed as if there was nothing else in the world. It was older than the Seven Kingdoms, and when he stood beneath it and looked up, it made Jon dizzy. He could feel the great weight of all that ice pressing down on him, as if it were about to topple, and somehow Jon knew that if it fell, the world fell with it.
So that kind of sets the tone for a lot of these quotes. If the wall fell, the world would fell with it. I'll just skim through these real quick. Jon says, "You could see it from miles off, a pale blue line across the northern horizon, stretching away to the east and west and vanishing into the far distance, immense and unbroken. This is the end of the world, it seemed to say." Another quote from A Game of Thrones. "Outside, Jon looked up at the wall shining in the sun, the melting ice creeping down its side in 100 thin fingers. Jon's rage was such that he would have smashed it all in an instant, and the world be damned. So the wall falls, the world is damned, it's the end of the world, and oh, by the way, Jon might have something to do with it." And then there's one more. "The wall stretched east and west as far as the eye could see, so huge that it shrunk the timbered keeps and stone towers of the castle to insignificance. It was the end of the world."
The end of the world, quite ominous.
Yeah, it's just like it sits there brooding about the end of the world and thinking about falling over.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vibe. When you sort of pull all the quotes about the wall, that's what you get. I actually was writing an episode just trying to get all the descriptions of the wall, and I kept seeing it. I was like, gosh, that's all it wants to do is fall over.
Yeah. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of foreshadowing.
I mean, what else can you do with the big wall, right?
Exactly. You got to bring it down. Tear down this wall.
Chekhov's wall has got to fall. Yeah, so maybe we'll get some sort of twisted Ronald Reagan reference when it happens.
Yeah. So kind of tied to this, I guess, is our other big question. What exactly are the others waiting for? The Night King, like Euron or Jon, potentially?
HBO to finish their series so George Martin can write the sixth book. I mean, they've been waiting for a long time. So yeah, there's a few possibilities, like a new Night King. Jon's death could be tied to that.
Yes.
Euron's rise to power. The comet coming and giving us a new moon meteors, knocking the wall over.
Yeah, they could be waiting for a disaster to come by and knock down the wall, and then they can cross it.
Right, and I always kind of get a smile on my face when I say moon meteors. But the point is, if there is some sort of disaster that's foreshadowed in the stars, there's some sort of time that they're waiting for that's going to trigger the long night. I mean, that's the thing, is they need something to trigger the long night so they can invade. So
if it literally was like something falling out of the sky, then it would make perfect sense that they could predict it, because you can literally look up and see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's,
theoretically.
I mean, it's the others are some sort of very old race, and the idea of the elder races knowing the movements of the stars, like
Starry
the Bloodstone
Wisdom.
Emperor and Starry Wisdom. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And even the literary clues, like if you look in the eyes of the others, like our little Night King here, what do you find? The blue stars. So it's almost like they're watching the stars, waiting for the stars to align and for the stars to maybe even fall out of the sky. But whatever it is, like I said, whether it's moon meteors or something else, they could just simply be waiting for something to trigger the long night.
Absolutely.
Jon is an interesting possibility. The whole prince that was promised, maybe he's the prince that was promised to the others, and he could be fulfilling, a prophecy on their side.
And then it could also have something to do with Dany and the coming of her dragons.
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. They've increased magic in the world, so maybe one of the sort of the pitfalls of that is the others also feed into that magic.
Yeah, somehow. And so the others returning could also be tied to a Stark being not in Winterfell.
Right, it's said so often, right? There must be a Stark in Winterfell. So, like, well, what happens?
So you would wonder why they have that saying in the first place. Where does that even come from?
Right, and the Starks are obviously an important family. Their lineage is tied to the others. And we saw that there seems to be a snowstorm emanating from Winterfell during the whole Ramsay wedding.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have even tied that together. Say, well, because at the same time, I think the weather at the Wall is not as bad.
Yeah.
So it actually seems like there's this horrible snowstorm hovering over like Winterfell area.
It's quite weird. And then, of course, it could have something to do with Bran. So in the show, we have the Night King seeing Bran inside of the weirwood net and touching him and marking him.
Right.
And then the spell or whatever that was keeping them out of the cave was broken. And
yeah, as soon as Bran came to, Bloodraven was all like, "Did he touch you?" He's like, "Oh, we're not safe then."
Mm-hmm.
So
the question is, will they attack the cave in the book?
Right, and we talked about that in the Three-Eyed Brandon episode, but it seems likely that they will. It makes sense. And there's even a castle on the wall called Icemark.
Yeah.
So I've definitely wondered if that was maybe a little something the showrunners got from George, and that we might see something similar, and Bran unknowingly could trigger some sort of a spell, you know.
It makes somewhat sense because, like we were talking about in the other episode, it seems like he is playing with some pretty potentially dangerous stuff.
Yeah, Bran definitely feels like Icarus, like a kid that doesn't understand the magic that they're playing with, and we should expect that to have some potentially, bad side effects. I mean, the Hodor thing is going to end up being like that. So
Hold the door.
yeah, however that goes down. So yeah, we've got a lot of possibilities there for what the others are waiting for. I do like the idea of Jon's death. Like we talked about in the Jon Resurrection episode, perhaps the others will white him and make him into a new Night King. So that would be cool if we see Jon's body in the ice cells, the others start showing up, Melisandre burns Shireen because of that, and like just everything goes crazy.
Everything is crazy, yeah.
That could happen.
Okay, so our next big question, how far will they get? So Dany did have that dream where she is fighting the others on the Trident.
That night she dreamt that she was Rhaegar riding to the Trident, but she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurpers' rebel hosts across the river, they were armored all in ice. But she bathed them in dragon fire, and they melted away like dew, and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare. I have only now awakened.
Now, there's the potential for this to mean the literal Trident, and then it also could mean something more symbolic or figurative.
Right, because the Battle of the Trident is very much Rhaegar's big battle. It's where he died. Dany is comparing herself to Rhaegar all through the chapter where that quote comes from. So there's a lot of thematic value, but it could literally be the Trident. The Trident is a very significant battle. George likes to create those echoes, the idea of the penultimate battle of the War of the Five Kings being in the same place that the others, have a big showdown against humankind. That makes a lot of sense. So that's one clue. In the TV show, they had that whole white hunt thing, right? And the whole purpose of that was to go and get a white and bring him back to King's Landing so that Cersei would take the threat credibly.
Serious.
It seemed like the kind of contrived storyline that D&D might have come up with as opposed to George.
No.
So
See, that's the thing. In the show, it didn't really seem like Winter or the White Walkers affected anything really in the South at all.
And that didn't make sense either.
No.
So all those problems might be solved if the White Walkers simply got past Winterfell, they reached the Trident, the southern part of Westeros. And at least the unnatural winter, the sun,
I think we could see Snow and Dorne, potentially.
Yeah, and here's another, Snow and Dorne, I would like that. And the others show strategy. Like at the Fist of the First Men, they seem to set up the Night's Watch and come at a certain time, and they seem to use strategy. So the idea of them, say, dividing once they get south of the Wall is in play. Some of them go to Winterfell, and some of them go somewhere else. We wondered if they would do that on the show, and then they didn't. But
yeah, it was Winterfell in the show and nothing else.
Yeah, because there was that whole bit about Cersei locking everybody outside the walls, and we were like, oh, they're all going to join the White Army when we were hoping the others would amount to something more in the show, but
we know how that turned out, guys.
We do. So another thing that they could be going for in the South is, of course, the God's Eye, because the God's Eye is basically the Weirwood Net hub. George has said that we'll see it. You know, there could be just a brand vision, but hopefully someone will go there. It could be important. It's mentioned a lot in the first couple books.
It's a huge place of power. There's apparently several like big rituals that happen there with the children of the forest. You know, sacrificing, breaking the arm of Dorne potentially.
Right,
So-
and I tend to think that the breaking of the arm of Dorne and whatever magic they did on the God's Eye is actually the same as the Long Night event. So I think that's all tied up together. So that would make a lot of sense to me. And as we've both talked about, you have your videos about the White Walkers and the She.
In conclusion, I believe that the story of the Children of the Forest versus the First Men is essentially the story of the She and the Milesians. And if George R. Martin's quote implies what I believe it implies, then that means that the others could be descended from the Children of the Forest.
And I've got some videos about the White Walkers and their connections to the Weirwoods. There are a lot of connections between the Weirwoods and the White Walkers.
There are.
So the idea that they're returning to the God's Eye to complete some spell to either kill the Weirwood net or rejoin the Weirwood net or cleanse it of human green seer filth or something, like, it's definitely, there's a lot of reasons why it could make sense that that's their target.
Yeah. So we touched on this just a little bit, but this raises the question of what about Winterfell? Will they lose the Winterfell battle? Now, personally, I think they almost have to. They have to lose Winterfell. Like, if Winterfell does not fall, then, you know, what's the others, and it just stops right there.
This is the series where Ned Stark dies.
Yeah.
So that we understand what the stakes are. So, yeah, I can see a lot of ways that this could work. There is good foreshadowing for a penultimate fight against the others at Winterfell. That definitely will happen. But even on the show, like, I was saying so many, you know, that that Long Night episode, right up until the last 5 minutes, could have been really good if it had ended differently. And I thought it was doing this really dark Empire Strikes Back thing where the others are going to win, and we're all sitting there watching this episode. We expect something heroic to happen, and basically it looks like the heroes lost. But of course, there's, you know, they really didn't. Bran comes back or something.
Something happens later.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think we can see like a pretty cool battle because, you know, Winterfell's been set up as like really resistant.
Right. So, you know, Winterfell has this thematic importance, right? It's got the hot springs. It seems designed to hold out against the others. But again, it would really raise the stakes if they beat the humans at Winterfell and get past them. But there's still a lot of ways that Winterfell could still be important because obviously it's where the story begins. It's a very important place thematically and from a storytelling point of view. So how could it still be important? You know, well, there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of things at Winterfell that could be significant.
Yeah. So there's potential magic at Winterfell. There's the crypts. It could be places where the survivors gather afterwards, after it's already fallen.
Yeah, the crypts are really the interesting thing. I mean, we haven't seen the lowest levels, right? Like, what's down there?
We don't know. They don't even know how far they go. Which reminds me of Bloodraven's Cave.
Totally. Bloodraven's Cave. And if Bran leaves Bloodraven's Cave, is there a Weirwood throne down in the crypts that Bran, you know, find a nice, cozy place to chill? The others might not get down there all the way, and Bran is still there with some survivors, and the others move on, or...
It would make sense, because, I mean, it could be connected all the way to that Weirwood in the Godswood.
Yeah, or they could lose Winterfell, and then have to, like, go back there and recover something, you know, Rhaegar's harp or whatever from the crypts. So, I do really like the Weirwood throne idea, you know, because we got that significant Weirwood tree right in the Godswood, and the crypts are built very close by.
And, you know, see, that's the thing, too. Like, the throne gets melted in the show, so I was expecting Bran to get a throne. Like, if the Iron Throne's going to be gone, then a Weirwood throne makes perfect sense, I think.
That would be awesome. Either from Winterfell or the God's Eye or, you know, some new capital. Yeah, it's lots of possibilities, so.
All right. So what about ice dragons?
What about ice dragons?
All right, so my take on this is ice dragons, maybe. Whited dragons, probably not. I don't know if dragons can actually be whited by other magic because they are just like kind of the opposite magic. So I don't know if that...
And so go ahead and elaborate on the difference between an ice dragon in the world of Ice and Fire and a white dragon.
So ice dragons are literally that, like ice dragons, and they breathe ice and they freeze things. It's not like blue fire or whatever was going on in the show.
Yeah, like made of ice, translucent wings.
And so we don't really know what was going on in the show with that whited dragon and what it was breathing exactly, but it seemed like just fire that was blue. So that's the difference. A whited dragon is an undead dragon, basically.
An undead dragon,
Zombie
right.
dragon.
The ice dragon from the books basically sounds like an other that is a dragon. It's like composed of ice. Like just in the way that the others melt, the ice dragons are said to melt when they're slain, so you can't recover their body. So yeah, it does seem like the ice dragon is a thing. George arguably invented the ice dragon. There are a couple of precedents in like role-playing games and fantasy, sort of, but it really is his beast. He's grown it from a bean, an ice bean. He talks about it a lot. He's got this short story called The Ice Dragon. I think that it is his baby, and I think he's going to find a way to make it come out. I do think so.
The ice dragon's going to come up from beneath the snow at some point, and it's going to be epic.
Yeah, and I think that the whited dragon equivalent will probably be something maybe with Euron and the horn, which we'll talk about in the Euron episode, of course. But yeah, so there you go. We are team probably, what would you put the odds at? Like slightly greater than 50-50?
Yeah, slightly greater than 50-50.
Okay, so our fingers are crossed for an ice dragon. That would be awesome. And they're supposedly, it's written that there is as big as 3 regular dragons. So it almost makes you think like Dany's 3 dragons versus the ice dragon would be a fair fight.
Well, if you look at the world of Ice and Fire, there's a picture of like 3 dragons, and then there's 1 dragon that's the size of the other 3. It's like Dany's 3-headed dragon.
Oh, like the shadows on the map or something?
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
so it's another dragon. So maybe
I was looking at the world of Ice and Fire, just looking at the pictures, really, just going through, and I get to this page, and I'll put an image of this page up on the screen. You see here that there is the 3-headed dragon, which represents Dany, House Targaryen, and you see on the other side, there's another dragon, a 4th dragon, that appears to be opposing the other 3, the 3-headed dragon. Now, we know that the 3-headed dragon pretty much represents Dany because the number 3 just goes hand in hand with her. She has 3 dragon eggs. She's called by the Undying Ones the Child of 3. It said that she must light 3 fires. She will be betrayed 3 times. So the number 3 is just associated with her. And then on top of that, just plainly, the sigil of House Targaryen is the 3-headed dragon. Could it be an ice dragon? Now, bear with me. Ice dragons are mentioned in the world of Ice and Fire. There are stories that come out of the Shivering Sea about ice dragons, and how they're many times the size of dragons that were found in Valyria. But however, they do breathe ice, according to legend.
Yeah, somebody emailed me about that like ages ago, I think. Yeah. Okay, so we mentioned the possibility of a new Night King. A new Night King in the sense that there was an original Night King in ancient Westerosi history, either shortly after the time of the Long Night. I think it was actually at the time of the Long Night, but it was sometime around that time. Ancient, Age of Heroes timescale we're talking about. So in the show, we've got everybody's favorite, horned ice majesty of no words at all because nobody talks on the show. But we don't have any sort of leader of the others in the books. So the first question is, do you think we will ever get any sort of equivalent in the books?
There's the potential with Euron, who has an interest in what seems like starting the Long Night to undergo his apotheosis. He wants to become a god that's worshipped. So I could see him potentially like invoking some kind of, Night King spirit, or becoming that, or having something like that possess him and take him over. So that's one of the possibilities.
Yeah, either intentionally or partially by accident, like he's opening the Pandora's box looking for power.
I think whatever happens, he won't like it.
Probably not. No, I've said this many times, but he feels like a Lovecraft character who's biting off more than he could chew, and will end up with his brain scrambled into madness at some point. But
absolutely,
we shall see. He's already halfway there if you read the Forsaken chapter. So Euron's definitely a character, and as far as the reason why I think there could be a Night King eventually in the books is because George has created the archetype. And just like he has the Azor Ahai archetype, where many characters in history in the current story do Azor Ahai things, they have flaming swords and they rise from the dead and they have the dragon symbolism and all this. The Night King is an archetype too. And people like Euron and Waymar Royce from the prologue and Aemond One-Eye from the Dance of the Dragons and a few other people, they definitely seem to play this Night King role. So I think it is a role that George is going to have somebody step into. Stannis, by the way, is another one. That's why he takes up residence at the Night Fort, for example, where the Night King used to be. So I like the idea of the Night King stepping out. I think that he could be stuck in the Weirwood net, the trope of the sorcerer that's been killed and his spirit is in some idol or
They
some.
did that in Westworld, but with computers.
It's definitely an old trope. It's been around a lot. So Inaluki from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn does that. So perhaps he is the original Azor Ahai, and he's in the Weirwood somewhere. Bran will set him free, and he'll run loose and
I
incarnate.
like that idea.
Spooky.
Yeah.
John, we mentioned the idea that the others could try to steal John's body
He could be the prince that was promised.
to the others.
Exactly.
Exactly. So that could be a
Jinx.
thing.
And we did talk about that idea of Bran downloading the consciousness that's inside of the Weirwood net.
Right.
And if he does do that, that means that humans did get kicked out.
Right, and that those two things could be essentially tied together. That's why Bran might be the last Green Seer with all the hive mind knowledge in his head, is because that's what they had to do to appease the others, if you will. Because everyone's been wondering, like, do we just have to defeat the others, just stab them a bunch of times? It must be more than that. And then the TV show gave us that truth, and it didn't seem to resonate. So the question is, well, what else? Is there an ancient wrong that has to be righted,
There
or
has to be more than just pokey stab. That's like a vampire trope.
right?
And I don't like it.
And it makes a ton of sense if they are frozen she, like George talks about and like you talked about in your video, then they just might want their tree homes back.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Makes a lot of sense. So the others might want to kill the dragons. They could be just sort of those diametrical magical opposites.
Ice and fire thing.
Right, and Dany's dragons were born recently, and the others are stirring. I mean, they've been stirring a little bit longer, but, you know.
Seems a little bit too on the nose, but, maybe it has something to do with that.
Yeah, and we've been thinking about it in reverse. Like, oh, the dragons are born to the world just in time for the rise of the others. But maybe it's the other way around, or maybe it's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, the song of Ice and Fire, like I've always said, implies a harmony, like a joining of two things. So maybe it's not about the big battle. Maybe it's about, balance.
They're just going to dance.
They're going to dance.
Yeah, a little hangout at the wall. So, and then we've mentioned it a couple times, but of course, what do they want? Well, it could be Jon. The whole prince that was promised to the others idea. So I really like that one. I think it's strong. I'd love to see Jon possessed temporarily and then the other spirit driven back out of him. I mean, I don't know. Martin could even take it a ways. What if Jon leads the invasion of the others for a while, like all the way to Winterfell, and isn't freed until Winterfell or
That'd
something?
be intense.
Yeah, dude, that could happen. I mean, this is the whole point of doing this exercise with the Winds of Winters, just to prepare you for some of the fun things that could come, and just to show you how much we don't really know, how much isn't pinned down about the ending. We haven't seen the ending yet, and there's just so many reasons to be excited for TWOW.
Definitely. And thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe to both of our channels. Links in the description.
And please share the videos, and that's it. Look, we'll probably do some live streams sometime in the future to follow up on some of these, so definitely leave your comments on the videos, and who knows.
Bye, guys. Thanks for watching.
See ya.